Betrayal hides behind beauty. Ambition hides behind loyalty. Discover how Julia shaped Tiberius and Rome itself. From the very beginning, Tiberius, a disciplined and ambitious prince of Rome, found himself confronting a reality that would shape his life forever. Julia the Elder, the daughter of Augustus and his wife, was a woman whose beauty, charm, and intelligence concealed a dangerous ambition. Their marriage, arranged for political alliance, began with appearances of harmony, but it didn't take long for Julia to reveal her true nature. Her charm and social influence at court grew daily, but behind it lay secret affairs and alliances that threatened Tiberius personally and politically. Every whisper, every secret meeting, and every hidden connection became a challenge he could not ignore. Slowly, he realized that Julia's loyalties were never truly aligned with him or the empire. They existed only to serve her own desires for power and influence. For Tiberius, Julia's betrayal was a harsh lesson that personal life and politics were inseparable. Her manipulations disrupted his emotional stability and forced him to sharpen his political vigilance. What had once been a source of affection became a constant threat. Her beauty and intelligence were now weapons that unsettled his domestic life and interfered with the fragile balance of Rome's court. He learned early that personal attachment could never be trusted blindly. This was only the beginning. Julia's cunning, her clandestine affairs, and secret plotting taught Tiberius that a ruler must consider every angle, every smile, gesture, and alliance could shift power in unexpected ways. Her betrayals honed his judgment, forging him into a strategic and wary leader. From this early exposure to deceit, Tiberius grew alert, calculating, and ever mindful that even those closest could manipulate with devastating effect. Julia's hidden motives cast a shadow over his life, shaping the emperor he would become. Intelligent and never to be underestimated. By the time Julia began to assert her influence at court, Tiberius understood that her ambitions were boundless. She smiled at senators, while secretly aligning with their rivals, whispered words that could ignite rumors, and fostered loyalties that undermined his authority. Tiberius watched with a growing sense of unease. Every gesture she made seemed innocent, yet he sensed the cunning behind it. Her ambition was masked as elegance, her charm a weapon sharper than any sword. Tiberius realized that political stability required more than armies. It required an intimate understanding of human motives. Julia became his most formidable lesson in this regard. Her ability to manipulate courtiers, to cultivate allies in secret, and to exploit weaknesses made him cautious, almost paranoid. He began to evaluate every relationship in terms of potential threat. Even family members were measured against the precedent of Julia's ambitions, ensuring that loyalty could be monitored, tested, and, if necessary, curtailed. Emotionally, Tiberius became distant. Where once affection had guided him, suspicion now ruled. Julia's betrayal had fractured trust. Her audacity in pursuing personal desires taught him that intimacy could be a source of political danger. Yet, paradoxically, he also acknowledged her brilliance. To govern Rome, he realized, one needed both strategy and perception. Julia's manipulations were a harsh mirror reflecting both human frailty and the imperatives of power. He could not afford to ignore either. Julia's influence extended to succession and family. Her charm and intelligence enabled her to form alliances, foster loyalty among courtiers, and occasionally challenge the emperor's authority through subtle acts. Tiberius observed silently, noting every action, every glance, every whisper. Her brilliance became a constant reminder that power is not only exercised through law and military might, but also through influence, perception, and psychological insight. From these observations, Tiberius refined his strategy. He learned to anticipate betrayal, to read intentions hidden beneath polite speech, and to act with precision. Julia's deceptions, scandals, and intrigues were a crucible, forging an emperor capable of understanding the dangerous currents of ambition, desire, and influence. Within the heart of Rome, Julia's first major scandal emerged quietly, but with consequences that shook the court. A young senator, rumored to be her secret lover, was caught in correspondence suggesting schemes against the emperor's policies. Tiberius, though restrained, understood the implicit message. Julia's influence extended even into those closest to him. He realized that her ambition and desire for dominance could not be ignored and demanded action. The scandal forced Tiberius to act decisively. Julia was confronted, her motives questioned, yet she smiled with defiance. Her intelligence and charm masking guilt, her ability to evade immediate consequences only heightened his awareness. Tiberius recognized that her influence was a weapon, and one that could destabilize not just his personal life, but the empire itself. Emotionally, Tiberius was torn. He had once been drawn to Julia's brilliance, captivated by her charm. Now, he saw that brilliance as a double-edged sword. Love and ambition, intertwined with cunning, had created a force he could neither ignore nor wholly control. Her betrayal left him emotionally guarded, sharpening his perception and deepening his ability to anticipate manipulation. Julia's scandal also had political repercussions. Courtiers began to choose sides, forming alliances either with the emperor or with Julia. Rumors spread like wildfire, and loyalty became a commodity. Tiberius realized that ruling Rome required not just authority but foresight and understanding of how human desire and deception could shift the balance of power at any moment. By the end of the scandal, Tiberius had grown wiser, more precocious, and more calculating. Julia's cunning had tested him, and though it had caused personal pain, it had also shaped him into a ruler who understood the precariousness of trust and the subtle dangers that lurked even in domestic alliances. Her brilliance, manipulative as it was, became both a threat and an education, preparing him for the challenges yet to come. Julia's manipulations were far from over. She had cultivated alliances among the nobility, creating networks that extended her influence over political decisions and court intrigues. Tiberius watched silently, calculating, understanding that any overt confrontation could trigger rebellion or scandal. He realized that she wielded charm and intelligence as tools to shift loyalties, and her ambition was a force that required both vigilance and patience. Emotionally, Tiberius felt the strain. He had once hoped for a partner who would share his sense of duty, yet Julia's ambition had created both fascination and frustration. He recognized her brilliance and understood her manipulative skills, yet the personal betrayal stung deeply. In these years, Tiberius learned to separate emotional impulse from political necessity, mastering the delicate art of ruling both an empire and a turbulent household. By now, Tiberius had come to understand that Julia's ambition knew no boundaries. Her gatherings in private chambers were carefully orchestrated events, where whispered promises, subtle threats, and secret alliances were woven together. She cultivated influence among powerful senators and wealthy families, ensuring that even minor decisions could sway in her favor. Tiberius observed from the shadows, realizing that every smile and gesture was calculated, and that her charm was a weapon capable of undermining the empire itself. The emperor grew more strategic. Julia's influence required constant surveillance. Courtiers were watched, messages intercepted, and loyalties tested. Tiberius learned to anticipate betrayal before it could happen, acting with precision to neutralize potential threats. Julia's brilliance was undeniable, but her manipulation left Tiberius no choice but to treat her as both a political adversary and a personal challenge. Emotionally, Tiberius wrestled with conflicting feelings. He had once admired Julia's intellect and beauty, yet now he saw her as a constant source of tension. Her actions had left him cautious, suspicious, and unable to fully trust anyone close to him. In this environment, his personal life became a battleground, where love, betrayal, and ambition intersected. Julia had transformed from a wife into a force that shaped his every decision, teaching him lessons in power, strategy, and human nature that no military campaign could provide. The rumors of Julia's next affair reached Tiberius before anyone else. Even from a distance, he could sense the subtle shifts in court whispers, the quiet exchanges between courtiers that hinted at secret meetings and covert alliances. A foreign envoy, young and ambitious, had been spotted spending extended hours in Julia's company, and Tiberius' instincts, honed by years of observation, warned him that this was far more than innocent conversation. The emperor understood the implications immediately. Her ambition, coupled with charm and intelligence, could manipulate even the most loyal subjects, turning them into instruments of her influence. Tiberius' anger was tempered by caution. He had learned the dangers of acting impulsively. A public confrontation with Julia could provoke scandal and destabilize the court, and the empire could not afford such risks. Instead, he resolved to watch, to gather evidence, and to anticipate her moves. Every gesture she made, every smile directed at a senator or diplomat, was meticulously recorded in his mind, a map of hidden elegancies and potential threats. The palace had become a chessboard, and Julia, a formidable player whose strategy forced Tiberius to respond with equal cunning. Emotionally, Tiberius felt the weight of betrayal more acutely than ever. Julia had once been his wife, bound to him not only by marriage but also by the political legacy of Augustus. Her audacity to seek personal gain at the expense of loyalty left him both enraged and fascinated. He recognized her brilliance. She was a master of influence, capable of exploiting ambition and desire in ways that even seasoned politicians could not predict. Yet, this brilliance, combined with treachery, had made her his most dangerous adversary. He understood that he was not simply managing a wife's indiscretions, but navigating a web of intrigue that could destabilize his reign. Every courtesan, every secretary, every official connected to Julia had to be observed, assessed, and, if necessary, neutralized. Despite his vigilance, Tiberius could not ignore the emotional toll. He had learned to separate personal desire from political necessity, but the human heart remained susceptible. Julia's manipulations forced him to confront the harsh reality that love, ambition, and betrayal were inseparable in the life of a ruler. Making him a ruler capable of anticipating deception and navigating the most treacherous currents of power. The court, already accustomed to her intelligence and social grace, might interpret an open reprimand as tyranny, while allies could quietly shift their loyalty to her side. Instead, Tiberius opted for careful, calculated countermeasures. He began by subtly realigning alliances, reinforcing loyalty through discreet gestures, personal attention, and incentives that rewarded discretion. Courtiers who might have been swayed by Julia's charm were drawn into his orbit, their allegiance tested and strengthened. He recognized that power in Rome was not only enforced through law or military might, but also through perception, influence, and subtle psychological strategy. Julia had become both his adversary and his teacher in the art of political nuance. Emotionally, Tiberius remained guarded. Her audacity had wounded him deeply, yet it also stirred a grudging respect. Julia's intellect and cunning were formidable. She could manipulate, charm, and deceive in ways that many rulers could not anticipate. He had learned to anticipate her moves, reading her intentions from small gestures and fleeting expressions. Yet the human element, the unpredictability of desire, envy, and ambition always kept him vigilant. Each day became a careful balance between managing his emotions and maintaining control over a court rife with intrigue. Julia's manipulations increasingly involved succession planning. She sought to influence the marriages, positions, and alliances of those around her, ensuring that her network extended into the highest ranks of the Senate and military. Tiberius responded with subtle interventions, guiding outcomes in a manner that neutralized potential threats without creating overt conflict. Every decision was calculated, every interaction carefully monitored. The palace had become a chessboard of strategy, and he, forced by necessity, had become a master of anticipation. Despite the constant strain, Tiberius realized that these challenges were sharpening his abilities. He was learning to think several steps ahead, to anticipate deception, and to navigate the delicate interplay of ambition, loyalty, and power. Julia's brilliance, once a source of personal fascination, had transformed into a catalyst for his own development as a ruler. Her betrayals, manipulations, and relentless ambition had forced him to cultivate an unparalleled vigilance. He understood that to maintain control, he must remain not only strong but also perceptive, strategic, and unyielding in the face of even the subtlest threats. In the silent moments of the night, Tiberius reflected on Julia's enduring influence. He recognized that her schemes, while personally painful, had taught him lessons in human behavior, political strategy, and the nature of power itself. Every whisper, every hidden alliance, every subtle act of manipulation was a reminder that ruling Rome required not just authority but wisdom, foresight, and the ability to anticipate the unexpected. Julia, in her brilliance and treachery, had become inseparable from his understanding of governance, leaving him prepared for the challenges yet to come. Julia's ambition and audacity eventually crossed a line that could no longer be ignored. Her affairs, whispered alliances, and manipulations had become too obvious, too dangerous. Tiberius, though patient and calculating, understood that her influence could destabilize both the imperial household and the court itself. The emperor began to gather evidence meticulously, noting every conversation, every secret meeting, and every subtle indication of betrayal. The time for subtle countermeasures had passed. Julia's machinations required decisive action. The decision to exile her was not made lightly. Tiberius knew that it would be interpreted by some as harsh, and by others as necessary for the stability of Rome. He coordinated carefully with Augustus, ensuring that the action appeared morally justified rather than purely political. Officially, her exile was framed as punishment for moral indiscretions and breaches of decorum. Behind the scenes, however, it was a strategic move to neutralize her power and protect both the emperor and the empire from further disruption. Julia, ever defiant, maintained a composed demeanor, even as the Edict of Exile was read. Her brilliance and charm masked any fear or regret. Though Tiberius knew the emotional satisfaction she had once taken from manipulating the court now faded into anger and frustration. Her departure was a blow to her personal ambitions, yet her influence lingered. Loyal courtiers and allies continued to whisper on her behalf, subtly testing Tiberius' authority and occasionally attempting to advance her interests, even from afar. Emotionally, Tiberius felt a complex mixture of relief, sorrow, and lingering resentment. Her brilliance had captivated him once, inspiring admiration and affection. Yet her betrayal had left him wary and emotionally guarded. He realized that even the most brilliant and talented partner could pose a threat when ambition eclipsed loyalty. Her absence brought clarity, but it also highlighted the fragile nature of trust and the constant vigilance required to maintain both personal and political stability. Julia's exile had broader political repercussions as well. Courtiers and senators had to recalibrate their alliances, and factions loyal to her either sought reconciliation with the emperor or faced marginalization. Tiberius used this period to strengthen his influence, reinforcing loyalty through subtle rewards and carefully orchestrated gestures of authority. Her cunning, ambition, and betrayal had forced him to become a ruler capable of navigating the most treacherous currents of power, both within his household and across the empire. In exile, Julia remained a shadow, a reminder that brilliance without loyalty could destabilize even the strongest ruler, and that vigilance, strategy, and emotional discipline were essential tools in the hands of an emperor. With Julia exiled and removed from the immediate affairs of the court, Tiberius finally had a rare moment to contemplate the life he had been forced to lead. Yet solitude brought little comfort. Her brilliance and betrayal lingered like a shadow over every decision, every memory, and every interaction. The lessons Julia had unwittingly imparted through her cunning, ambition, and audacity echoed constantly in his mind. He realized that ruling Rome required not just the enforcement of law or command of armies, but an acute understanding of human nature, perception, and influence. The palace, once a place of domestic engagement, had become a theater of careful observation. Every glance of a courtier, every smile at a banquet, every whispered conversation might conceal ambition or deceit. Julia's manipulations had trained him to perceive these subtle signals, sharpening his strategic abilities. In a sense, her betrayal had been a masterclass in politics. Trusts could never be assumed. Loyalty was fragile, and brilliance could easily become treachery if left unchecked. He had learned to anticipate deception and act with precision, balancing power, perception, and control in ways he had never considered before. Emotionally, Tiberius wrestled with a mixture of relief, sorrow, and residual bitterness. Her intellect had drawn him in, her beauty had captivated him, yet her ambition had corrupted their relationship, turning affection into a weapon of influence. He reflected on the emotional cost of leadership, the pain of betrayal, the isolation of vigilance, and the necessity of restraint. Every lesson she had imposed upon him had been painful, yet each had strengthened his resolve and refined his judgment. Tiberius also considered the broader implications of Julia's exile. The court was calmer now, yet the undercurrents of human ambition persisted. Her former allies still whispered, subtly testing his authority. Her influence, though diminished, remained a cautionary tale. Brilliance, when unrestrained by loyalty, could destabilize even the most disciplined ruler. He understood that vigilance could not cease. The lessons of the past demanded constant attention and strategic foresight. In the quiet of the evening, Tiberius often walked the halls alone, contemplating the balance of love, betrayal, and duty. Julia's absence, while a relief, had left him aware of the precariousness of trust and the constant vigilance required to maintain power. He recognized that solitude, though sometimes lonely, provided clarity, allowing him to reflect on the lessons of manipulation, ambition, and human frailty. Julia's brilliance and betrayal, once sources of personal turmoil, had ultimately transformed him. Her actions had forged a ruler capable of navigating both the personal and political complexities of Rome with intelligence, discipline, and caution. In that solitude, Tiberius understood the bitter truth. The heart could be a dangerous instrument, ambition a weapon, and every action, whether small or large, carried consequences that extended far beyond the individual. As night fell over the palace, he paused to acknowledge the indelible mark she had left on him, both as a ruler and as a man. Julia's shadow would never fully disappear, but he had emerged stronger, sharper, and more prepared to wield the tools of leadership with a balance of wisdom, vigilance, and measured restraint. With Augustus' death, Tiberius ascended to the throne, assuming full control over the empire. The lessons of his personal life, particularly the manipulations and betrayals of Julia, guided his every decision. Though her exile had removed the immediate threat, the experience had left an indelible mark, shaping the way he governed, the alliances he forged, and the way he assessed loyalty. In the early days of his rule, Tiberius moved quietly but decisively. He strengthened the imperial administration, ensuring that key positions were filled with loyal and competent individuals. The palace became a fortress not only of stone but of observation and calculation. He monitored alliances, subtle rivalries, and the influence of remaining courtiers, aware that any residual loyalty to Julia could destabilize his authority. Every whisper, every favor, every handshake was a potential tool or threat. He had learned from Julia that brilliance without loyalty was dangerous, and he would tolerate no such ambiguity in his court. Emotionally, the emperor remained reserved and distant. Julia's betrayal had instilled a deep caution, making him wary of personal attachments. Affection, once freely given, was now measured and guarded. He understood that even the most charming and intelligent figures could exploit trust for their own ambition. This understanding permeated not just his personal interactions, but his public appearances as well. Every smile, every gesture, every word was carefully considered, balancing authority with perception, control with subtlety. Julia's shadow loomed even in her absence. Two excellent tales of her cunning and intelligence persisted at court. Courtiers whispered of her influence in distant circles, her subtle manipulation of allies who remained loyal. Tiberius, aware of these ongoing undercurrents, maintained vigilance. He could not afford to underestimate the reach of her intellect or the lingering effect of her ambition. Her betrayal had taught him that power extended beyond the immediate sphere of influence, requiring foresight, patience, and careful management of perception. Politically, Tiberius applied these lessons with precision. Decisions were weighed for both their practical and symbolic consequences. He recognized that the appearance of justice, control, and moral authority was as crucial as actual enforcement. Julia had revealed how deception, charm, and subtle manipulation could shift loyalty and influence outcomes. Tiberius now used that knowledge to stabilize Rome, to cultivate trust selectively, and to neutralize potential threats before they became dangerous. Through these strategies, he became a ruler both respected and feared. Courtiers understood that loyalty was mandatory but never assumed, and that every action, public or private, could have consequences. Julia's brilliance had forced him to develop unparalleled vigilance and political acumen. Her betrayal had left scars, but it had also forged a ruler capable of navigating the complexities of power, desire, and human ambition with unparalleled skill. By the end of his first year, Tiberius' authority was solid, his strategies effective, and his mind sharpened by the bitter lessons of betrayal. Julia's legacy, both treacherous and brilliant, remained embedded in his approach to governance, ensuring that every decision would be informed by caution, foresight, and the memory of ambition unrestrained. As Tiberius settled further into his role as emperor, he realized that Julia's influence, though physically absent, still cast a long shadow over Rome. The court, accustomed to her intelligence and cunning, continued to whisper rumors in her favor. Some courtiers, perhaps nostalgic for her charm or ambitious for the favor she once commanded, subtly challenged his authority. Tiberius understood that these whispers, though seemingly innocuous, were seeds of potential unrest. The lessons of Julia's manipulation had taught him that influence could persist even in exile, and vigilance was the key to survival and control. Analyzed motives with the precision of a general planning a campaign. The fear of betrayal became a constant companion, yet it was not born solely of paranoia. It was a measured response to years of exposure to Julia's brilliance and treachery. Every smile, every favor, every courteous gesture from a senator or official was now weighed against its potential political consequence. In his mind, the echoes of Julia's schemes formed a blueprint for understanding human ambition and deceit. Emotionally, Tiberius remained isolated. Trust, once a natural inclination, had been replaced with careful assessment. Even those closest to him were subject to scrutiny, and affection was measured and cautious. Julia's betrayal had imposed a permanent wariness in his character, a protective shield against potential threats. Yet, this emotional armor was paired with a growing strategic genius. He had learned to anticipate the unpredictable, to counter influence before it could crystallize into action, and to maintain control over an empire where perception could be as powerful as decree. Julia's shadow also influenced his approach to succession. The emperor ensured that heirs and key officials were carefully vetted and their alliances managed with meticulous attention. He had learned that brilliance untempered by loyalty was dangerous, and he applied this principle across his court. Every appointment, every promotion, and every marriage alliance was analyzed for loyalty, potential influence, and the risk of manipulation. Julia had shown him that unchecked ambition could destabilize even the strongest ruler, and he was determined that Rome would never again be vulnerable to such subtles. The emperor's growing paranoia, however, was not without purpose. It became a tool as much as a burden. By expecting deception, Tiberius could often prevent it. Courtiers knew that while they could attempt to maneuver within the court, the emperor's gaze was constant, analytical, and patient. Every decision reflected not only practical necessity but also strategic foresight, ensuring that influence was monitored and potential threats neutralized before they could erupt. In the stillness of the palace, Tiberius often reflected on the paradox Julia had created. Her brilliance had been both dangerous and instructive, her betrayal both painful and enlightening. Through her manipulation, he had learned the inseparable link between personal relationships and political power, the fragility of trust, and the necessity of calculated vigilance. She had shaped him into a ruler capable of anticipating human ambition, navigating court intrigue, and exercising authority with both wisdom and precision. By the 12th year of his life as emperor, Tiberius had mastered the subtle arts of control, surveillance, and influence that Julia had indirectly taught him. The palace, once a place of luxury and occasional indulgence, had transformed into a strategic center where every decision was calculated, every alliance analyzed, and every potential threat neutralized before it could manifest. Julia's absence had not erased her influence. Her brilliance had left an imprint on his approach to power, guiding his management of both personal and political spheres. Tiberius' consolidation of power was methodical. He reinforced loyalty through carefully considered appointments, rewarding those whose fidelity could be trusted and sidelining those whose ambitions mirrored Julia's former cunning. Every member of the Senate was evaluated not only for competence, but also for subtle indicators of influence, charm, and manipulation. Understood now more than ever. That skill alone was insufficient to secure loyalty. Character, ambition, and susceptibility to temptation had to be scrutinized. Julia's manipulations had demonstrated the fragility of trust, and he applied that lesson rigorously. Emotionally, Tiberius continued his retreat into calculated detachment. The betrayal he had suffered at Julia's hands had left scars that could not be entirely healed. Love and affection were now instruments to be wielded carefully, measured against their potential risks. Even allies who seemed trustworthy were subtly tested, their motives weighed against both ambition and loyalty. The emperor's growing reserve became both armor and tool, protecting him from deception while allowing him to manage the delicate balance of influence within his court. Despite this emotional caution, Tiberius did not neglect strategy or diplomacy. Courtiers knew that subtle gestures, hidden messages, and unspoken ambitions were rarely unnoticed. Julia's schemes had instilled in him a keen sense of psychological strategy. Where others might see harmless intrigue, he saw potential revolts, subtle attempts to undermine authority, or openings for future manipulation. The emperor also strengthened Rome's military and administrative structure. He recognized that the stability of the empire relied not only on personal cunning, but also on institutional authority. Julia's manipulations had shown him that influence extended beyond the walls of the palace. Courtiers, soldiers, and governors could be swayed by ambition, charm, or resentment. Tiberius implemented policies that ensured loyalty was reinforced across the empire, from distant provinces to the heart of Rome itself. In quiet reflection, Tiberius acknowledged that Julia's brilliance, while destructive in its time, had forged his most significant strengths as a ruler. Her betrayal had forced him to cultivate patience, observation, and strategic thinking. She had revealed the power of human desire and the dangers of unchecked ambition. Through these lessons, Tiberius had emerged not only as a ruler of Rome, but as a master of perception, influence, and subtle control, a man shaped indelibly by both love and betrayal. As the years of Tiberius' rule progressed, His vigilance transformed gradually into something darker. Paranoia. The lessons learned from Julia's manipulations and betrayals had proven invaluable, but they had also left a permanent imprint on his psyche. He could no longer trust easily, not even those who had proven their loyalty over decades. Every glance, every whispered conversation, every subtle smile in the court was subject to scrutiny. Julia's genius for influence had trained him to see the potential for deceit everywhere. And in that heightened awareness, the emperor's world became increasingly isolated. Emotionally, Tiberius withdrew from intimacy. Julia's betrayal had instilled a deep caution, one that extended beyond the personal to encompass all human interaction. He observed relationships among courtiers, senators, and generals with clinical precision, analyzing motives, testing loyalty, and anticipating manipulations before they could occur. This detachment became both a tool and a burden. It protected him from harm, but also denied him the warmth of trust and genuine companionship. In his solitude, the emperor often reflected on the delicate balance between love and betrayal, loyalty and ambition, power and vulnerability. Julia's shadow loomed constantly, even from afar. Rumors of her influence continued to reach the palace, whispered through courtiers who had once been her allies or admirers. Tiberius knew that her brilliance could inspire loyalty or rebellion alike, and he remained vigilant against any lingering effects of her scheming. Her audacy had taught him the unpredictability of human ambition. Even those who appeared harmless could become dangerous if motivated by opportunity, desire, or resentment. To maintain control, Tiberius relied increasingly on a combination of observation, subtle manipulation, and indirect influence. He carefully structured the court to reward loyalty and punish even minor signs of disloyalty. Every decision was measured, and every interaction was analyzed for hidden meanings. He had learned from Julia that brilliance could be both an asset and a threat. Intelligence, coupled with ambition, could destabilize a ruler's authority if not anticipated and managed. Despite the isolation, Tiberius' political acumen flourished. The exile of Julia and the lessons of her betrayal allowed him to focus on consolidating the empire. Military commands were distributed with careful calculation. Provincial governors monitored meticulously, and senatorial power subtly curtailed when necessary. Even as he navigated these challenges, the personal cost of his vigilance remained high. The emperor had grown distant, reserved, and often called a man shaped as much by experience with betrayal as by the weight of the empire itself. In quiet moments, he allowed himself reflection. Julia's manipulations, though devastating in their immediacy, had forced him to become a ruler who anticipated deception, understood the intricacies of influence, and wielded authority with precision. Her brilliance, combined with her ambition, had made him both cautious and strategic, teaching lessons that no formal education or military campaign could provide, though their personal relationship had ended in betrayal and exile. Julia's impact on Tiberius' life remained undeniable. She had shaped not only his personal vigilance, but also the very strategies that allowed him to govern an empire. As the evening descended over Rome, Tiberius often stood alone in his chambers, contemplating the fragile balance between trust and suspicion, power and control. Julia's legacy lingered, a constant reminder that brilliance without loyalty could threaten even the most disciplined ruler, and that vigilance, strategy, and emotional restraint were essential for survival and authority. By this stage of his rule, Tiberius had internalized the lessons Julia's manipulations had left him. Her audacity had exposed the fragile balance between loyalty and ambition, teaching him that even the closest family ties could conceal subtle threats. This understanding drove the emperor's careful approach to succession planning and court management. Every appointment, every marriage alliance, and every promotion within the Senate and military was now scrutinized not only for competence, but for allegiance. He recognized that unchecked ambition could quickly unravel the stability of the empire, and Julia's brilliance had shown him just how cunning ambition could be. Succession planning became a calculated art. Tiberius ensured that heirs and influential courtiers were placed in positions where their loyalty could be measured and reinforced. He orchestrated marriages to strengthen political alliances, simultaneously neutralizing potential threats. while enhancing the stability of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. Julia's manipulations had demonstrated that personal charm and strategic influence could rival military and political power, and Tiberius now applied these lessons to ensure that loyalty was more than a superficial promise. It was embedded into the very fabric of the empire's governance. Within the court, Tiberius cultivated a subtle network of observers and informants. Courtiers who had once been Julia's allies or admirers were carefully monitored, their interactions analyzed for signs of lingering influence or subversive intent. Every whisper of intrigue was met with deliberate actions, sometimes direct, sometimes indirect, but always precise. Julia's audacity had impressed upon him that even minor acts of ambition could ripple outward, threatening the equilibrium of the court and, by extension, the stability of Rome itself. The emperor's approach combined vigilance, anticipation, and calculated intervention, ensuring that the court remained under careful control without appearing overtly oppressive. Emotionally, Tiberius' detachment deepened. The betrayal he had suffered at Julia's hands had reinforced a lifelong caution. Trust was no longer freely given. Affection was measured, and relationships were maintained as much for their utility as for companionship. Yet, in this emotional isolation, Tiberius found clarity. He was able to think strategically, act decisively, and anticipate consequences with a precision that those guided solely by emotion could never match. Julia's influence had not only shaped his approach to governance, but had fundamentally altered his understanding of human behavior and ambition. Tiberius also implemented subtle psychological strategies to maintain authority. He created an environment in which loyalty was continuously tested and ambition carefully monitored. Courtiers understood that while the emperor's gaze was steady, it was also precise, capable of discerning the intentions behind every word, gesture, and alliance. Julia's lessons in manipulation and intrigue had taught him that perception could be as powerful as decree, and he used that knowledge to reinforce his authority without resorting to unnecessary displays of force. Through these methods, Tiberius solidified the foundations of his empire. Julia's absence had removed the immediate threat, but her impact persisted as a guiding force, shaping the emperor's policies, interactions, and understanding of power. Her brilliance and betrayal had transformed him into a ruler who combined vigilance, foresight, and emotional discipline, an emperor capable of managing the complexities of court, succession, and the ambitions of men and women alike. By this stage of his reign, Tiberius had become a master of perception and control, yet the personal cost of his vigilance was undeniable. Julia's manipulations had taught him invaluable lessons about ambition, influence, and betrayal, but they had also instilled a permanent wariness that transformed his relationships into calculated interactions. Trust had become a currency he dispensed sparingly, affection a rare commodity reserved only for the most reliable allies. In the quiet moments of the night, he often reflected on the paradox of leadership. The brilliance that inspired loyalty could just as easily become a weapon of subversion. The palace, once vibrant with social activity and the mingling of courtiers, now resembled a theater of observation. Tiberius scrutinized every interaction, every whispered conversation, and every gesture for hidden meaning. Julia's lessons had taught him that brilliance and charm could mask dangerous ambition. He now approached the court as a chessboard, where each figure moved with calculated intent, and where his own responses had to be precise and anticipatory. Even minor missteps or unnoticed ambitions could ripple into serious threats, and Tiberius had no intention of allowing such instability to fester. Emotionally, he became increasingly solitary. Friends and allies were carefully monitored, and casual intimacy was replaced with strategic interaction. Julia's betrayal had revealed that personal connections, when exploited, could destabilize both life and empire. Love, loyalty, and friendship were no longer simple human experiences. They were variables in a complex equation of power. Tiberius' emotional detachment was not cruelty but necessity, a shield that allowed him to rule decisively while minimizing risk from hidden ambitions. Despite his isolation, Tiberius remained deeply engaged with the empire's affairs. Military and administrative decisions were executed with precision as he relied on the lessons of observation, anticipation, and subtle influence he had learned from Julia's schemes. Governors, generals, and senators were kept under careful scrutiny, their loyalties measured against both action and perception. Tiberius understood that a ruler's power extended beyond law and military might. It was equally rooted in perception, influence, and the manipulation of ambition. The shadow of Julia lingered in more subtle ways as well, though she was far from Rome. Her intelligence and audacity continued to inspire whispers among courtiers and senators. Tiberius remained aware that influence could persist across distance and time, and he maintained vigilance accordingly. Her absence had not diminished the lessons she imparted, rather it magnified their significance. Every subtle manipulation, every ambitious move by his court, was now filtered through the prism of her brilliance and treachery. In solitude, Tiberius often reflected on how Julia's actions had shaped him. Her cunning had forced him to develop strategic foresight, to anticipate deception, and to recognize the latent ambitions of those around him. The personal pain of betrayal had transformed into a tool for governance, making him more observant, disciplined, and unyielding. In this fusion of personal experience and political necessity, Tiberius had become a ruler who combined emotional restraint with intellectual mastery, a man whose vigilance, forged in the fires of betrayal, ensured the stability and endurance of his reign. Deepening isolation. The lessons Julia had imparted through betrayal and audacity remained ever present in his mind. Her manipulations had exposed vulnerabilities in both the emperor and the court, demonstrating how intelligence, charm, and ambition could destabilize even the most disciplined ruler. Tiberius now applied these lessons rigorously, leaving no corner of the empire unchecked and no alliance unexamined. Julia's shadow, though physically absent, continued to shape both his strategic decisions and personal demeanor. Tiberius increasingly withdrew from public life, preferring the calculated safety of his private chambers and the observant detachment of Capri. The villa on the island became both sanctuary and command center, allowing him to oversee the empire while maintaining a controlled distance from those who might betray him. Here the solitude forced reflection, and the lessons of Julia's brilliance were revisited constantly. Her capacity to manipulate loyalty and influence ambition had taught him that vigilance was the truest form of power and emotional restraint, the necessary shield for a ruler. Emotionally, Tiberius grew more cautious and reserved. Julia's betrayal had instilled in him a permanent wariness. Intimacy, trust, and affection became carefully calculated interactions. Even those loyal to him were subject to scrutiny, their motives assessed against both ambition and historical precedent. Yet despite this emotional detachment, he acknowledged that Julia had shaped the very core of his character as emperor. Her brilliance, cunning, and capacity for subversion had forged in him the ability to anticipate the unpredictable, to counter manipulation before it could escalate, and to command with subtlety that inspired both respect and fear. Politically, the lessons endured. Tiberius maintained a tight control over the Senate and key officials, ensuring that no individual could consolidate power to challenge him. He implemented systems of observation, loyalty tests, and subtle influence that mirrored the strategies Julia had once used for her own ends. Governors and generals were monitored for both overt competence and hidden ambition. Courtiers were aware that even minor gestures could be interpreted as challenges to the emperor's authority, reinforcing a culture of careful calculation within the palace. Though Julia had been exiled decades earlier, her influence lingered as a cautionary tale and a blueprint. Every whisper, every subtle intrigue reminded Tiberius of the dangers of brilliance untempered by loyalty. Her lessons were now embedded in the very mechanisms of governance: vigilance, foresight, and emotional discipline. The empire thrived under this system, stable yet tightly controlled, with a ruler whose mind remained as sharp and wary as ever. As night fell over Capri, Tiberius often reflected quietly on the paradox of Julia's presence in his life. Her brilliance had caused him pain and tested his authority, yet it had also forged his greatest strengths. He had learned to navigate human ambition, perceive hidden motives, and exercise authority with a precision few could rival. Julia's shadow, once a source of scandal and betrayal, had become an instrument through which he maintained control over both his own emotions and the empire itself. And in that realization, Tiberius acknowledged with a rare sense of serenity the enduring impact of a life intertwined with brilliance, ambition, and betrayal. In the later years of his reign, Tiberius often found himself reflecting on the life and influence of Julia. Exiled for her ambition, charm, and manipulations, she had nonetheless remained an ever-present figure in his thoughts. Her brilliance, once a source of personal fascination and admiration, had become a model of both caution and strategy. Emotionally, Tiberius had become almost entirely The pain of betrayal, coupled with the constant need for vigilance, had created a distance between him and all those around him. Friends, courtiers, and even family were evaluated with an analytical eye. Their motives continuously measured against potential ambition or subversion. Even in exile, her reputation as a brilliant and cunning woman persisted, reminding courtiers that intelligence, if unbridled by loyalty, could threaten authority. Tiberius recognized that the influence of one individual could extend far beyond their physical presence, and he used this understanding to reinforce his own control. Every alliance, every conversation, and every subtle act of influence was measured against the standard Julia had set: brilliant, ambitious, and unpredictable. Politically, Tiberius' rule remained secure, but his methods were shaped as much by caution as by strength. Julia's lessons had taught him that power could be challenged, not only through overt rebellion, but also through subtle manipulation, charm, and ambition. He responded with vigilance, careful orchestration of court dynamics, and strategic observation of both allies and potential rivals. The exile of Julia had removed a direct threat, but her legacy persisted as a template for understanding the complexities of influence and control. In the solitude of his chambers, Tiberius reflected on the paradox of Julia's role in his life. She had caused him personal anguish, tested his authority, and challenged his trust, yet she had also provided him with an unparalleled education in the art of ruling. Her brilliance, combined with her treachery, had sharpened his instincts, honed his strategy, and strengthened his ability to govern with precision. He understood now that the greatest lessons often came from those who challenged him most profoundly, that the personal and political were inseparable in the life of a ruler. As he gazed across the silent corridors of the palace and listened to the distant waves against Capri's cliffs, Tiberius accepted the enduring impact of Julia's life. She had been both adversary and teacher, lover and betrayer, and her influence had become woven into the very fabric of his rule. Through reflection and vigilance, he had transformed the pain of betrayal into a tool of governance, ensuring that the emperor and his authority remained. Julia's shadow, though distant, would forever shape the mind, strategies, and legacy of Tiberius, Emperor of Rome. As Tiberius entered the final decade of his reign, the lessons of Julia's ambition and betrayal were etched deeply into his approach to both personal and political life. Her influence, though originating decades earlier, continued to shape the emperor's decisions and interactions. He had become a ruler defined not only by power and strategy, but also by caution and emotional detachment. Julia's brilliance had forced him to anticipate deception at every level, and her audacity had taught him that ambition, when left unchecked, could undermine even the most disciplined ruler. During this period, Tiberius withdrew further from public life. He spent more time at his villa on Capri, relying on letters, messengers, and a network of loyal administrators to manage the empire. While some saw this as retreat, it was in reality a calculated strategy. From his isolated vantage point, he could observe, evaluate, and manipulate the court without the distractions of personal interactions. Julia's lessons had made him keenly aware that proximity could be dangerous. The brilliance and cunning of others could exploit personal bonds to advance hidden agendas. By maintaining distance, Tiberius maximized control while minimizing risk. Emotionally, the emperor's isolation grew. Trust remained rare, affection measured, and relationships assessed for both loyalty and potential danger. Julia's betrayal had created an enduring wariness, and Tiberius now understood that even those closest to him could wield influence in subtle and dangerous ways. Personal loss combined with his enduring vigilance shaped a ruler who saw human behavior as both tool and threat. Love and ambition were inseparable forces capable of building or destroying, and Tiberius navigated them with caution, honed by years of observation. Politically, his strategies were as precise as ever. Governors, generals, and senators were continually assessed with promotions, honors, and responsibilities allocated to reinforce loyalty. Julia's manipulations had revealed how influence could be wielded indirectly through whispers, charm, and subtle alliances. Tiberius now applied the same understanding to maintain stability. The exile of Julia had removed an immediate threat, but her legacy endured as a model for both vigilance and strategy. Every decision reflected a balance between pragmatic governance and calculated observation. The court, aware of Tiberius' growing caution, operated with heightened sensitivity. Those who had once been inspired or influenced by Julia understood that any attempted manipulation would be observed and countered. Tiberius' awareness of human ambition had grown from the lessons she taught him. He now anticipated both open and covert challenges with near imperceptible precision. Julia's brilliance, once dangerous to him personally, had become a standard against which he measured all others. In private moments, Tiberius reflected on the paradox of her influence. Julia had been both adversary and teacher-lover and betrayer, and her brilliance had shaped the very core of his understanding of power. Through exile, betrayal, and observation, he had learned to navigate human ambition, manage loyalty, and govern with an almost surgical precision. The shadow of Julia remained a constant companion, guiding the emperor, his judgments, shaping his strategies, and defining the emotional and political landscape of Rome. As night descended over Capri, Tiberius contemplated the empire he controlled and the personal costs of vigilance. Julia's brilliance had forced him into solitude, yet it had also made him one of the most strategically adept rulers Rome had ever seen. Her influence, though born of treachery, had become inseparable from the legacy of Tiberius himself. In the final years of his reign, Tiberius' life was defined by reflection, caution, and the enduring lessons of Julia's brilliance and betrayal. Time had strengthened his command over the empire, yet it had also deepened his isolation. The betrayal he had endured early in life had instilled a permanent vigilance, a heightened awareness of the subtle currents of ambition, influence, and desire that ran through both the court and the broader Roman world. Julia, though long exiled, continued to shape the strategies, thoughts, and emotional calculations of the emperor. By now, the empire was largely stable under his guidance. Governors, military commanders, and senators were carefully vetted promotions, strategically awarded, and political rivals neutralized before they could gather strength. The lessons Julia had imparted through her cunning, charm, and treachery had taught Tiberius to anticipate ambition, measure loyalty, and act decisively when necessary. No longer merely a personal experience or influence had become embedded in the administrative and psychological fabric of his reign. Every subtle gesture or whisper at court was analyzed with the precision of a ruler who had once been betrayed by brilliance itself. Emotionally, Tiberius remained detached. Relationships were navigated with strategic calculation, affection measured, and trust reserved for only the most reliable allies. Julia's betrayal had been a defining experience, shaping his understanding of both human nature and the responsibilities of power. Even those who had proven loyal were subtly monitored, not out of paranoia alone, but as a reflection of the lessons learned from past missteps. Every encounter was a blend of diplomacy, observation, and strategic foresight, a way of managing not just the present, but potential futures of influence and ambition. Despite the isolation, Tiberius reflected often on Julia's complex impact on his life. Her audacity, intelligence, and ambition had caused him pain, challenged his authority, and tested his trust. But they had also forged his greatest straits as a ruler. Through her betrayal, he had learned the necessity of vigilance, the art of political foresight, and the subtle power of perception. Julia's brilliance had become a measure against which all others were assessed, a template for understanding both loyalty and manipulation, and a constant reminder of the fragility of human trust. In private, Tiberius contemplated the paradoxical nature of power, love, and betrayal. Julia's influence had been simultaneously destructive and instructive, shaping both his personal character and his approach to governance. Her absence had removed immediate danger, but the strategies she had forced him to develop remained essential to the maintenance of authority and the stability of Rome. He understood now that brilliance without loyalty was the most dangerous force in the empire, and that mastery over both human behavior and personal restraint was essential for survival and legacy. As he walked through the quiet halls of his palace, Tiberius reflected on the enduring lessons of Julia's life. Her betrayal, brilliance, and audacity had left a permanent imprint not only on his personal vigilance, but on the very mechanisms of power he employed to rule Rome. In her absence, he had forged an empire guided by foresight, caution, and subtle influence, a testament to both her impact and the ruler she had shaped through challenge and betrayal. In the final chapter of his life, Tiberius stood as a ruler, molded by experience, vigilance, and the lessons of betrayal. Julia, though exiled decades earlier, remained an indelible presence in his mind. Her brilliance, cunning, and ambition had tested him, hurt him, and challenged his authority, but they had also shaped the very strategies that allowed him to govern Rome with unmatched precision. He understood now that her influence extended far beyond the personal. It had taught him to read the subtleties of human nature, anticipate deception, and balance authority with careful observation. The emperor's isolation, long criticized by historians, was the result of the profound understanding he had gained from Julia's actions. By learning from her audacity, he had developed a unique combination of emotional restraint and strategic foresight. Every ally was measured, every decision analyzed, and every potential threat anticipated. Julia's life had revealed that ambition, charm, and brilliance could all be used as weapons, and that even exile could not erase the ripple of influence one person could leave behind. As Tiberius reflected on the empire he recognized that Julia had been both adversary and inadvertent teacher. Her betrayal had transformed him, forging a ruler capable of navigating intrigue, maintaining loyalty, and wielding power with subtlety that few could match. Her lessons were embedded in the very structures of governance. He maintained the careful management of the court, the surveillance of potential rivals, and the delicate orchestration of alliances that ensured stability. She had shown him that brilliance untempered by loyalty could destabilize a ruler, and he had turned that understanding into the foundation of his authority. In private, Tiberius allowed himself rare moments of contemplation. He remembered Julia not only for her ambition and cunning, but also for the way she had forced him to grow. The pain of betrayal had become a tool, the caution it inspired a shield, and the lessons it imparted a guide for ruling an empire. Through her influence, he had mastered the art of control, foresight, and subtlety, balancing the demands of leadership with the complexities of human ambition. As the sun set over Capri, the quiet waves lapping against the shore seemed to echo the rhythm of a life spent observing, reflecting, and anticipating. Tiberius had learned to navigate the treacherous intersections of loyalty, desire, and power, and in doing so had forged a legacy as one of Rome's most vigilant and strategic rulers. Julia's shadow, a mixture of brilliance and betrayal, remained with him, always shaping his decisions and his understanding of human nature until his final days. And now, as we close this chapter of history, let us leave the world of emperors and exiles behind. The story of Tiberius and Julia, of brilliance, betrayal, and vigilance, reminds us that the lessons of the past echo in the present. And so, after a journey through ambition, intrigue, and reflection, it is time to rest. Good night, and sweet dreams.